We are going to have a panel discussion here to talk about trends in the digital transformation and enterprise tech space. So rather than a presentation, we thought it'd be good to pull together some of the brightest minds in the consulting industry that are dealing with dozens of clients every day, that are talking to the clients, learning from them, and seeing what's on their minds as well. So I really want to dive into some of the trends that this team is seeing in our client space. And rather than, let's do real quick introductions, I suppose, before we jump into the questions. I was going to do it differently. Why don't we start with you, Scott? Just a real quick 30-second overview, if you don't mind.
Scott Janke, Senior Director at Third Stage. Been with them for about 3.5, but been in consulting and operations for 35 plus years. So.
Mehdi Aftahi, the CTO at Tech. We are a selection and evaluation consulting firm with a platform that allows the users to go in and evaluate different applications. I've been with the company since its inception, so I'll be here to give some knowledge back if I can.
Mitch Austin, Director of Transformation at Third Stage. Been with Third Stage for about 3 years and been in the digital transformation space for coming up on 15 years.
Khalid Morris, Director of Strategy Transformation at Third Stage. I've been with them for just over 3 years, and I've been in this space for about 20.
Christy Barber, Senior Manager at Third Stage, and I'm one of the OGs that started. I've been with Third Stage 6.5 years.
Amanda Patton, I'm a director also at Third Stage, and I've been with Third Stage for 4 years and in the space for about 15.
Great. So great team. Thank you guys for joining me up here today. What I want to do, we're going to try and do this without mentioning AI quite yet. We know AI is going to come up, so if we'll come back to that here in a second. But I guess I know that the answer to this first question is going to entail AI in some capacity, but I also want to think outside the world of AI. And maybe we'll start with you, Scott. What sort of emerging technologies do you see happening in addition to AI in the enterprise tech space here in the next 3 to 5 years? In terms of like what clients are looking for and just what you're seeing with our client teams and what kind of boots on the ground with companies and where their minds are.
Yeah, I still see the reverse migration of personal computing coming into the organizations. So all the things that people are doing with their own lives within Amazon and the cell phones, the smartphones, and all the applications that come with it tends to drive kind of this concept within organizations. Why can't we apply that here? And in fact, many of the cases, it comes up quite often for those organizations that have large inventory shipping challenges of like, why do I keep pointing to Amazon as being able to tell me it's being picked, it's on a truck, it's in this location, and I know exactly what's going on with it. Why can't we do that as well, right? And so you see more and more of the user community as the younger employees coming on to the workforce are saying the same things to their organization. Why can't we do what I am able to do in my personal life in the organization, right? But I also mentioned in an earlier session that I think the concepts of really advanced technology and companies want to leapfrog from where they are today can be a challenge, right? The data we just talked about with the AI team, but just being able to block and tackle within an organization needs to be kind of their first Band-Aid before they really get comfortable with advanced technologies within the footprint.
So it's almost like that continued consumerization of enterprise technology where people are expecting their enterprise technology to work the way their consumer, like the way they would use an app on their phone or
Exactly.
Okay. How about you, Mehdi? You guys do a lot of software evaluations. You're looking at all the major ERP vendors and on a daily basis like we are. What kind of trends are you seeing in the vendor community?
Yeah, the trends, or should I say the wish, it's actually very in line with the what Scott was saying, which is I foresee that in the future the ERP systems and lots of these adjacent systems, whether it being Amazon or shipping companies or trading companies, they would have an integrated solutions or more integration is going to happen within the ERP systems and other auxiliary systems. So as we see today, there are more and more vendors are trying to work off of each other's platform, and to me, that's a very good way to go forward. Of course, AI is going to play a big role in that, but an open integration and ease of integration between different platforms is something that probably is going to benefit the market a lot.
Yeah. So Mitch, because it's hard to have this conversation without getting to AI, even though I've kind of handicapped you guys by saying, please don't, let's hold off on AI, but let's dive into it now, though. What kind of AI trends are you seeing, like, with our clients? Are they, how does our average client think about AI? Are they excited about it? Are they skeptical? Do they not care? Do they have bigger fish to fry? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say most of our clients are interested in AI. They want to understand from a roadmap perspective how they can actually start to reap the benefits of AI. And what we're seeing is that oftentimes we need to work on establishing a foundation of data before we can even be talking about what AI can do for them. Because if you have, the term garbage in, garbage out, if you have bad data, there's no way that adding an AI engine onto that already struggling data is going to drive your business forward. So we really are focused on laying the foundation and the building blocks in data to be able to support those advanced capabilities.
Yeah, and speaking of data, I've got a data guy right here next to me. Khalid, is one of many skills you have is in data, and I know you've done a lot of work with clients on their data efforts. What are you seeing in terms of when you just think about analytics, AI, business intelligence? I mean, what are some of the trends you're seeing with our clients?
When I think of AI, I actually think of data. I think of it from I'm probably more interested in machine learning than I am, at least from a conversation perspective, than the programmatic aspect of AI. But I think the trend is along the line, and I think it puts greater importance on having more control of your data from a client perspective, so that you can reap some of the benefits that's out there from an AI perspective. So I think that the control of the data is everything. It's starting to become even more historical data even. A lot of the times we would archive a lot of systems data, and you think, oh, we don't need data past a certain, nowadays with what's going on, I think, in the marketplace from an AI perspective, there's no real harm in it. Like, why not push more data into some of these platforms that we have, so that we can kind of get better trend analysis.
Yeah, it's well said. And then Christy, when you think of small and mid-market companies, which I know that's an area of specialization for you, and you have a passion for small and mid-market companies, is there anything different you're seeing in that market with AI and just emerging technology that maybe is a little bit different than the larger enterprises?
I think a little bit of the differences with AI and the smaller businesses is they're looking at it as a way to save time and money and resources, and being able to utilize it to help with labor. So if I don't have to hire extra people and I can rely on AI because I know my data is good and I'm going to get good returns out of what it's producing, they kind of see it that way. And I think, to just piggyback on what Scott said too, you see a lot of the smaller companies and medium size of just really looking at the supply chain. How can we really manage this and see it and integrate with other solutions that are out there that the larger companies are using that we want to be able to utilize and afford? So yeah, those are the two things that I'm seeing with that.
Yeah. So Amanda, you used to work in the vendor community, and obviously you do consulting and lead our consulting teams now. What other trends are you seeing, like, amongst our software selection clients and with vendors? Is there anything else you would add beyond AI and some of the things we talked about?
I would echo everything I've heard. I think a big thing is people really wanting their technology at work to reflect what we use on our phones and at home. But a lot of those companies are running, AS400, and they're coming off of super old, and so that delta is too big at first, right? And so thinking about what it takes to get there. And also a lot of people, or a lot of the issues that we run into is the separation of IT and business. And a lot of these initiatives are IT-led, and they kind of leave the business out of the conversation a lot of times, which we know, how that ends up. So I think, listening to people's want to jump to the future, right? They're still using paper and Excel, but they want to incorporate AI immediately, right? So those are some of the conversations that we've got to have of like let's take some time and talk about where you are now, where you want to be, and then all the work that needs to go in between, this point and that point, and to not be in a hurry. And I think too that, like somebody else said, the data is what drives everything. The quality of the analytics, the reporting, all the things that people are solving for come out of the quality of the data. And I think people don't. I think people are catching on, but people still are resistant to that. They think it's some separate thing that lives out in the ether, and it's actually driving all those decisions.
Yeah, that's well said. It seems like the organizational digital maturity is not advancing nearly as fast as the vendor community. So all these guys over here, that sponsor this event, they are way ahead of most organizations, and so, which is great. You need them to drive innovation. We need them to push the boundaries of what technology can do. But then when you step back and look at your own organization, you might see that, okay, that's great for longer term, but let's get some basic foundational stuff in place first, and let's crawl before we run, and that sort of thing. And I think that's okay too. I think a lot of times in the software community, we get so enamored by all this cool, sexy, emerging technology stuff that we forget to recognize that it's okay that we're not there yet. But that's something we can aspire to longer term.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. We're starting to see release notes of software updates coming from software vendors that include things that are very AI-ish, process automation and things like that. But if you push hard and find out, well, it's kind of in the infancy stage, beta almost to some extent, do you really want to be the first one to do that? So even though it's in the press all the time you read articles and go online, I think it's a question of from a market leader, follower, adoption model, how far forward do you want to be if you're not already there? So if you have a sophisticated IT operations, you may be able to push the envelope and be able to solve difficulties that arise with early adoption. But if you're not, are you adding more insult to injury, so to speak, with I have lots of legacy issues and I'm going to go forward with something that really hasn't been proven in companies within my industry. So I think there's a little bit more of a wait and see in a lot of those industries than let's just jump on it because it sounds cool.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to note too and recognize that, with these advancements in technology, it's not making transformations any easier. There's still risk, failure rates are still high. The divide between where we are today and where technology is just growing, which means we've got a bigger chasm to fill now, and it's a bigger jump. It's a bigger organizational and operational change for organizations. So if anything, I think the rate of failure or the risk of failure actually increases with these advancements in technologies. But let's talk about failure for a moment. And I'm going to come back to you, Scott, and I'll come back to you, Mitch and Mehdi, too. But when we look at failures, and the reason I'm starting with you is because you do a lot of expert witness work within Third Stage Consulting, where we testify in court when there's a failure. We'll analyze why the project failed, that sort of thing. How often is a failure related to technology versus something else?
I was just talking to a gentleman after the session this morning. So occasionally we get a case where the software vendor, very much in the example I just provided, has kind of this vaporware concept of an idea. Didn't necessarily come clean to the client that you would be the first to do this. And they use the implementation to develop the application. But because it's a software development that has gone beyond an implementation to a client, it just continues. And when the client finally recognizes that this is something that is a problem, whether they're managing it themselves or not, you'll see the software vendor or the SI ramp up billing to try and fix it faster, but they're doing it in a live implementation, and that's a recipe for disaster. But having said that, most of the failures and implementations that we see in the expert witness case is much more around the blocking and tackling. They may even do some proper planning up front. Most often they don't, but it's the painful exercise of being diligent during the execution. They don't do change orders. They let scope creep happen beyond recognition. The client forces a fixed date, where the two areas that always get cut off the knees is training and testing. And so you deploy into an environment that is more of a production test environment, and all hell breaks loose, right? And those are the stories you read. So it's the execution, planning of course, but execution and being formal in how you manage that project will typically get you out of that problem.
Right. How about you, Mehdi? What are you seeing in terms of failures, and what do clients struggle with the most?
Yeah, it's a very complicated process, and the ERP implementations are very complicated projects for any organization. As such, I think finding the failure and what's the cause of it is also very complicated. But from our experience, is a combination of what you just said, which is poor planning on the client side, and thinking that going with this technology, which was probably tested with a competitor environment or a company that they know, or their past experience with the IT team, could solve all their problem. But also, I would say some of that is amplified by the desire for these vendors and the SIs to push the sales and agree to whatever they even don't know what's going to happen in the future, and say, yeah, we'll take care of that, and try to get through that sales cycle as quickly as possible. The combination of two is just, to me, is going back to the fact that we should not rush into these kind of technological situations or purchases, and do the due diligence with the proper, research on the organization side, and as well talk to the vendors and make sure that they actually can deliver what they promise. Once you have that, then you get into the change management and all the other aspects of project management, change management during the implementation, which all have contributions towards success and failure of the project.
Right. Yeah, it's well said. Now, Mitch, what about this phenomenon we're seeing in the market where vendors are forcing an upgrade? SAP, for example, legacy SAP customers have until 2027 to get off their legacy system into S/4HANA. Microsoft's doing the same thing with Dynamics 365. A lot of the vendors are obviously making this push to the cloud, which makes sense. That's where we're going. The world is headed to the cloud, and the vendors can't maintain 2 to 3 different versions of their software effectively. So it makes sense that that's where we're going. But how's that affecting clients and risk levels for clients that are going through transformation?
Yeah, it's incredibly risky. I was actually just meeting with a client where they mapped out an implementation over the course of 4 years, and SAP came in and said, we really like you to do this in 9 months. And it's just such a disconnect between what is realistic and what it actually takes to go live. And I think that as there's more and more push towards that, there's going to be scarcity of resources of people that have done this before, and there's going to be new entrants into the market because all these companies need to work with someone, and that just continues to create a risky environment. So there's a lot going on with these vendors making that push, and I don't know if 2027 is going to be real this time or not. I think there's a lot of people digging in their heels and saying, we're not going to do it, our business isn't ready for this, and we'll see how the vendors respond.
Yeah, and that's okay, in my opinion. If it's not the right time, or if you're just not going to get something done by whatever arbitrary deadline you're being given, then don't do it. Don't put your business at risk like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a lot of times vendors will push so hard, and people get this sort of FOMO thing, like, well, everyone's going to the cloud. Oh, everyone's getting off, the legacy system by whatever date. It really doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is what's best for your business, and making sure that you manage your own risk and do what fits your priorities and your overall strategy. I want to shift gears and come to you, Amanda, on change management. So you sort of alluded to it a moment ago about just the impact that technology has on people. Can you maybe just unpack a little bit, like in general, what are some of the major change challenges that you see clients struggle with the most, especially when you think about some of these the more advanced technologies?
So many.
Yeah. What are a couple of them that you just think are common, like common people issues or adoption issues?
I think communication is a huge part of it, and a lot of people view change management or people stuff or communication as these soft issues, and it depends on the culture of the organization. We have some that are very open-minded to that, and they realize the value, and others that are not. They say, this is what we're doing, we're going to mandate it from the top, and people can do it or they can leave, right? So it depends on the culture. I think the communication, I'm talking about obviously the awareness, the pre-planning, all of the foundational work that goes before you ever go to market to even look. What are we solving for? Why are we doing this? What are we trying to get out of it? And which is why, as consultants, we will just continue to ask why. Well, why do you need that data? Because I need for this report. Well, what are you going to do with that report? Okay, well then where is that coming from, right? It's digging down to what are you actually trying to achieve. If you're just trying to replace technology for the sake of replacing technology, that's not really change necessarily, right? Because all you're doing is spending a lot of time and money to automate process that doesn't work potentially, and we see that happen a lot. I think the other thing is taking the time to understand the modality by which certain groups learn, how they like to be communicated with. If you're on a production floor, your job is going to look different on a new system than it will if you're in the back office. And so understanding how people like to learn, need to learn, how they want to receive information, what is the training and the testing going to look like. It is a ton of change, and you're asking everyone to do this on top of their day job, right? And that's another issue, is not taking the time for resource allocation, understanding, like, do we need to backfill? If so, which roles? When should we do that? How should we do it? And, you know, a lot of, somebody talked about this, I think Scott talked about this earlier in his session, where a client will just kind of hand the keys over to the SI or the vendor. The intimate knowledge of your business, nobody can know that like you. And so that's another thing, is like, you've got to have certain stakeholders involved, but you don't want too many and too deep in the organization. Then you have big, long meetings that don't really achieve anything, right? So to me, it's the blocking and tackling. It's the simple stuff that really can get things off of the rails. And it all has to do with, you know, communications planning, change management, and starting simply, and then avoiding arbitrary dates, right? Because so many people are just a huge fan of, like, this is the date, and nobody really knows why or where that came from. Now, if your system's being sunset, you know, end of life, then obviously, but a lot of times the board will decide we need to go live by this date, and then you'll have failures because people are trying to rush past really important foundational things to meet this date, and nobody ever asks the question, what is the significance of this date? So to me, that's another part of it, because the change management and the communication and listening to people about how they want to do training and testing and receive information is huge, not only for success of the project, but just for buy-in in general, so that people are they feel supported and a part of the project, not finding out 2 weeks before go live and it's a bunch of things that are mandated.
Right. If you look at things that are going to have the most impact on people's lives and jobs, you think of, like, AI, for example. Those of you that were in the session with Chad Baker right before this, in this room, he talked a lot about AI and some use cases of how AI could be used to automate certain processes and that sort of thing. And when you look at something like AI, that's a real disruptive technology. It's really cool, but it's also super disruptive, and I think it has the potential to transform businesses in a positive way, but I think it also has a potential to scare the hell out of people. You know, as far as, you know, you think about the average person in an organization that spent their entire career managing a spreadsheet or using their tribal knowledge to work through problems, and they survived with heroics and things like that. Now all of a sudden you're talking about just automating it with AI. That might be best for the business long term, but now you have people that are scared. And so to your point about communication and providing that clarity to the organization, you have to be clear about, if I'm automating your job, is your job going away?
And the organizational design that comes in there, how do we now repurpose and reskill those people into
Yeah.
this new area of strategic, that kind of thing. But if we're not talking about it, people may assume the worst.
Yeah, and they will.
And they will. And then there's a revolt within that stays quiet. And the workarounds remain, and people kind of don't communicate that in meetings if they don't feel heard by management. And then post go live, you realize that people are doing all the same old stuff, but
Yeah.
with the new system. So
Yeah.
you didn't actually solve any of the business problems that you were trying to address.
Yeah, yeah. What about with smaller businesses, Christy? Are there, when you think about change management, is it any easier for a small business because they're more generally smaller, more nimble, less hierarchical, or whatever? Does that make change easier when they go through tech initiatives, or how does change differ with a smaller company?
I think it shows up in a couple different ways. One is, what does the culture of the company look like? When it is smaller, a lot of times it's easier to get people on board, and there's clearer communication along the way of, we're going to be adopting this system, this is why, this is about the timeline when we're going to be doing it, so you don't get as much aversion to it of, oh no, like what are we doing? But you do see in a lot of ways of when it is a smaller organization of that job security. Is my job going to go away because I've been doing this task, I own this spreadsheet, or I always hand key enter these data items? What is that going to look like? And two examples I've seen of that is one, even with my own family's business that put in a new point of sale system long time ago, and a lot of the cashiers were, oh no, how is my job going to go away because this automates so many things. I'm not hand keying anything in. It was when the scan guns came out, and just different ways to be able to record the data that they weren't used to. And then most recently, a project that Scott and I were on is a lady manually enters in every single EDI order into QuickBooks. And now they're going to have an ERP with an EDI integration, and her job of manually entering that is going to go away. And there's just this apprehension of, well, how are you going to use me? And it's being able to communicate to people. You have so much to offer, your strategic skills and all of that I don't need you to spend it on the tactical work. And I feel like as long as you're communicating very clearly their value to the organization, they will pour their value back into you.
Yeah, and I think most of the time, I like the cashier example because it's such with the benefit of hindsight now, we can look back and see how that whole movement went. And of course, it did change the retail business in this example. It automated people's jobs, but I don't think it necessarily eliminated jobs. If anything, it just allowed them to be more productive and crank through more customers or sell more stuff. And I think that's, assuming that's true with AI, and you're using AI as a way to get more out of people and make them better at their jobs, that's what you have to communicate. And back to Amanda's point about the organizational design, I think that's really important. You have to paint that vision of what people's jobs are going to look like, because just training them right before go live is not going to cut it.
And that's what happened with my family's organization. They didn't really tell them a new point of sale was coming. It's like, hey, we're getting new cash registers. And then 2 days before it goes live, all right, you need to train. And there was just a lot of apprehension from people of, oh no, I have to learn something new and it's going live in 2 days. Am I confident enough to do that? No.
So
Yeah.
Khalid, how do we see clients balancing all the stuff we're talking about? We're talking about risk, we're talking about timelines, we're talking about emerging technologies and AI and data and all the stuff that needs to get done. And then we're also talking about time pressures. We've got this time pressure to implement something new, to go through a transformation. We can't have infinite resources, time and budget and all that stuff. But how do organizations, how do you recommend an organization balance the upfront time and cost for an implementation versus the impact it has on your business, positive or negative, after the implementation? So how do we navigate that?
How are they doing it, or how should they?
How should they be doing it?
Okay, because how I would say they should be doing it is the whiteboard still matters. I think that they need to think less about the technology and what's out there, especially because a lot of these technologies, and I think the point was made, I don't know who made it, a lot of them they don't even really understand yet. And in some respects, they may not need to understand, because it may not be applicable to the way that they're going to be successful in the marketplace. So my suggestion early would be to whiteboard it. What do we need? What are we trying to do? What does the future look like for our organization? Like, how do we strategically gain an advantage and not have a technology conversation, not have a conversation about their resources or the planning or all the complexities that happen with an ERP implementation, and just strategically get on the same page about what it is that they're trying to do, what they need to do in order to outline the kind of vision that whatever organization sort of, whatever iteration of this needs to sort of look like going forward, and then work backwards from that particular point, from a planning perspective, from, across the different levers. And when you skip steps, you tend to get bit. We're talking about OCM. The whole umbrella falls under, whole umbrella of testing kind of falls under that. And there's so many important aspects of the software development lifecycle that you can't just unsee. Despite the fact that you have this timeline and you kind of say, okay, we need to be done by this point, the journey is the journey, right? And I think when you whiteboard it, you have a broad perspective about what this needs to look like, and now you can put realism to how are we going to tactically approach this. Is it realistic for us to have this done in one phase? Like, do we need to break this up into smaller parts that are easier for our organization to consume? Maybe it's not a good idea to tackle an ERP system at this time. Maybe we just need to get our data together from a foundational level so that we're prepared to control parts of whatever, whatever, even if they're going AI and, machine learning. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Maybe we do want to implement some algorithms on our data sets, and in order to do that, we need to segment our data a little bit better early in the process, right? These are conversations that you can have before you even bring in a consultant to start the process of helping to execute on a given plan. So from my perspective, the should is get back into your little business class, and get on the whiteboard and have everyone with their specialties there to kind of help architect a business that that needs technology to support it, but have clarity around what that business needs to look like going forward.
Yeah, that's really well said. And if you missed the session earlier today with Scott and others talking about implementation planning in phase 0, I highly recommend you watch that video of the recording of that session if you missed it. It's really good, and it talks a lot about, these guys talk a lot about how to do what Khalid just said, how to create that vision of what the project is and what's the real timeline going to be, because most of the time vendors have overly optimistic assumptions and they view things from a technical lens. They're not viewing things from a business change lens, and it's the business change lens that really determines how long it's going to take. And guess what? Unfortunately, usually it means it's going to take longer because of all the business and organizational changes that need to happen. Also, Mehdi, I want to ask you this question. I know we've talked a lot about AI, but there's some other emerging trends in the space that we haven't touched on. Some of which I know Jan Bana is going to talk about later today in his keynote session. He'll talk a little bit about this, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but maybe as a preview of what he might talk about. Can you talk a little bit about when you think of like low-code, no-code platforms and microservices? Could you maybe explain like how real is this stuff? Are you seeing that affect enterprise technology when clients are coming to you guys looking for new software?
In general, the low code, no code, it's like some of the buzzwords that are coming in this, area. As long as it's proven to deliver the functionality from the client's point of view, shouldn't be a deciding factor in the decision of the selecting a software or not. It has to be part of what overall decision they're going to be, what overall the delivery of the services and the processes are going to be. We go back with the open source and everything else. It's kind of the same thing. As long as you can support the business and transform the business, to me, and to our recommendations, it doesn't matter if it's low code, no code, open source, or anything else. It has to support the change, and it has to support the business requirements that the clients have. It all, again, goes back to what Khalid was saying: get into those boardrooms, whiteboard, and get the architecture done. And then, if that supports with a cloud solution or with an on-premise solution or low-code, no-code, open source, I don't think it matters. We shouldn't be fixated on a certain technology versus the other. We should focus on business. And again, the same thing can be said about AI. We're not going to go an ERP route because there's an AI component. We want the AI to be seamlessly integrated into the process and helps process improvement, right? So that's what I can say. But so
Yeah.
Can I jump in there? Because I want to give an example of strategically how that discussion can happen in a boardroom. Some organizations want to lean IT staff, and there's no advantage or disadvantage to any of these things, right? Like maybe that's just what they want going forward. They want to lean IT staff. If they do, a low code environment would make a ton of sense, right? That would make some platforms, some applications more valuable than others. Then there are other organizations that don't want that, right? They may have a core. I did some consulting for Amazon, and I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and I think I shared, they had an army of developers. It was just like, it felt like an army, and it felt like an international army, where they had folks all over the place. That's an advantage for them. They don't want a low code, no code environment. They want to utilize their capital. And so when you're in those strategic conversations, I think it goes to, what do we have? What makes us great? What makes us special? What do we want to do in the future? And then you kind of can layer in those kinds of conversations. Well, if this is what we're going to be, then this is the kind of environment, low code, no code, or development centric, or the kinds of languages. That's where those things, I think, start to play more and kind of can support what you want to do from a business perspective.
Yeah, it's really well said. And coming back to that last part of what supports your business, and if it doesn't support your business, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Should we be doing it? I mean, is there something else we should be doing different instead of, or should we redirect our efforts elsewhere? There's a couple different directions I wanted to go here, but Mitch, I'll ask you this question. So one of the age-old debates in our industry that I don't think will ever get resolved, but we can still have the debate, is the whole single ERP, one single system that can integrate an entire business. And speaking of Jan Bond, he's the guy that, in some ways, you created that whole category by starting Bond Software back in the 70s. That was one of the pioneering single integrated ERP systems. In the meantime, over the last 30 years or however long it's been, you've got this best of breed movement over on the side that's happening in parallel. You've got companies like Salesforce with CRM and Workday with HR and other providers, best of breed providers that are niche focused on one function versus trying to be everything to everyone. How do you see that debate settling? Will it ever get settled? Are you seeing any trends or movement? Is the pendulum swinging one way or the other? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think the debate will ever be settled because it's all about what's unique about your business and what your requirements are and what is the business outcomes you're trying to drive towards. I had a conversation yesterday with a client who, they were a 30-man organization and they were on Salesforce. And one person thought that they were overspending and the other thought there's no other system that's better in the world. And while CRM, Salesforce is the name brand in CRM, they are for a reason, they're not the best fit for everyone. And so it's looking at what do we have, what are we trying to accomplish, and what's going to be the best fit for that. For this client, a simple CRM that was embedded into their ERP was going to be the best solution for them because it was the most cost effective. It was the best at being able to send data from one module to another and to get information into their users' hands in the most effective way possible. So we are seeing that there's more of this idea that you can have a smaller financials footprint and use specialized technology around it. And I really like that idea, but you have to have the staff and the competencies around it to be able to support that model. It's not it's not a fit for everyone.
Yeah, and you could see it almost seems like if you take two extreme examples, two extreme clients. One is let's say they're a big multinational, they've grown through acquisition, they're decentralized, but they want to centralize and standardize more. and then over here you've got another company that's faster moving. They're more of an agile organization. They don't value centralization or standardization the same way the other company does. Those are going to lead you to two very different answers. I think that bigger company is probably going to want that single integrated ERP system potentially, even though that's going to be a painful transition for them. That might be what they want. The other company might be more of a best of breed candidate, and I think that's what you have to do is look at, well, what is our strategy? What are we really trying to accomplish here? You wouldn't want to do best of breed if you don't have the IT staff, like you said, if you don't have resources in place to manage that environment. But you also don't want to go, single ERP if it's going to be too much of a change or too much of a trade-off, for your organization.
Yeah, exactly.
How about you, Scott? What are you seeing with clients? As we work, I know you work with a variety of clients. Some are best of breed, some are single ERP, some are somewhere between. Do you see any movement, or do you see the pendulum swing in one way or the other? And you've been studying this space for a long time too, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's. I was thinking about. I was going to chime in if you didn't ask me that question. And don't shoot the messenger when I say this. If the requirement session and the idea of where your organization needs to go isn't focused solely on what your secret sauce is, we spend so much time around specifics around inventory management, supply chain, finance and accounting. If that's what separates you from your competitors, then focus on that one area. If not, who cares? And again, don't shoot me, but who cares, right? If you're gap accounting and you're not doing anything special, you don't have any kind of offshore accounts that are nobody needs to know about. You need a finance application that works, right? That shouldn't be what separates you from a competitor unless you're doing something unique like financing in a unique way or things like that. So focus on your secret sauce and treat the other stuff as just basic blocking and tackling I keep talking about. That's what we need to focus on. But we spend so much time around how they do inventory management over the last 30 years to the nth degree of, so you need to be able to receive product, show up in a system that you can assign to an order, put it on a location you can find it, and then get rid of it, right? It's simple stuff like that that we spend weeks talking about unique inventory management applications that doesn't have anything to do with your business, truly why your customers come to you. So I think the idea around ERPs trying to be the one-stop shopping and all these best of breeds, you're trying to fit in these unique areas of businesses that really isn't what differentiates you from your competitors at all, right? Your product, how you engage with your customers, or going back to Amazon, their logistics is their secret sauce, right? How quickly they can get things out that day. That's unique to them. Other things may not be, right? And I wanted to go back to the disruptors around AI. For those who are experienced enough, different way of saying mature, remember that the internet was going to shut down all physical retail? Didn't happen. Remember when Teams and WebEx and the like came out? Air travel for business is going to stop completely. I think it's grown, right? So putting your faith in new technologies that is going to solve all your problems and shut down other, maybe not. Maybe not. So keep an open eye that some of these good, true ways of running business and how you got to your point in time today is still valid going forward. The tools might change, but it's not going to do away with home delivery of stuff, right? So I think it's a function. I don't think that the one and done is really appropriate for too many people. And I think it's probably an evolution of where you are in your life cycle. Smaller companies, they can get away with embedded technology within a single platform because they probably have nothing in other areas. Large companies, they have the luxury of fine-tuning what they need.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Not to disagree with you. I mean, I'm totally in agreement with you, but I just want to also mention that it takes a special discipline to go with the best of breed, because you need to, as you mentioned, you need to have resources to make sure that all the connections are maintained over the years. And also, you're not just adding to your solutions another application just because you like it or because you saw a demo and you think it's a good idea. You need to actually make sure that that's a strategic decision and you can maintain that connection going forward. So we see a lot of companies that come to us and they have like 15 or 16, 20, 25 different systems that they have decided from 10 years ago that add this, add that, add that. Now they are in a situation where none of these systems are working together and there's data duplications all over the place, and they're looking at minimizing that number of systems that they have. And so not saying that one way or the other is better. Whatever you do, you need to have that discipline and a vision to say, okay, every time you add a new system, you actually have to have a plan how to maintain and how you go forward, and also to make sure that you're not just adding for the sake of adding new systems.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, some companies are forced into the best of breed scenario because of acquisition. So just because they are, you know, I had a client that had, I won't give the exact number, but I'll say over 50 ERP systems in their one company. And the reason why was because they just kept buying people and they didn't really have a plan for how they were going to integrate a lot of these technologies. So I'm sensitive to that, Scott, point. I've said strategy here a lot, but it matters. I think that you need to have a plan and you need to be strategic from a business perspective around what you're going to do, and not allow the technology to sort of be in front of your business where you're in a reactive space to, we just bought like 8, 10 different companies and now we have 10 different ERP systems. What do we do now, right? As opposed to kind of seeing some of that early and just saying, okay, we know we're going to have some acquisition. These are some of the elements that we're going to deal with, and sort of just being in front of how you're going to deal with that, or what makes the most sense for your organization, right? Because if you do need to transition into a best of breed organization because it fits, then do that. And then have the different planning in place to say that our technical model is going to change just by the nature of the way we're going about business, and we're going to go ahead and support it accordingly and just turn into this new iteration of whatever the organization is.
Yeah, it's well said. Are there questions from the audience too? We've got a few minutes left, and I have more I can get through, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Yep. Yeah, the question is the level of digital fluency keeping up with advancements in technology? I'm paraphrasing what you said. That's essentially, I think, what you're asking. What are your thoughts, Amanda, on that? You know, as far as, and I'm picking on you on this one. Amanda loves unscripted questions, by the way. So just a real quick side story. This whole panel I've worked with before, and I know everyone here is fine. I can ask whatever questions, and they don't really care. But Amanda likes to prepare, so I sent her the questions like an hour before the session, which she was not happy about. So she's not very happy with me already. And now I'm going to ask you another unscripted question after all that. But what are you seeing in terms of, like, you think of the clients you're working with right now? How advanced are they, or how far behind are they? Because you kind of alluded to that earlier.
Yeah, our famous line for everything is "it depends," because it really does. And there are a lot of clients that are light years ahead. I mean, they are just up with everything. They speak the language, not only at the IT staff, but the other executives. And so that's fun when that happens, because you're already kind of able to just jump right in. A lot of times, like you alluded to, you've got to distill a lot of that into what does this mean for the business, to the C-suite, and then have the communication kind of go up from the others in the organization. So a lot of that is just learning. Again, it's the communications plan, it's the culture. But I would say, like I said, it depends on the industry. I've been working with a lot of manufacturing clients, and if you're oil and gas or A&D, and you're slower to adapt, and you're coming off of technology that you've been running for 30 or 40 years, that's a different conversation than some of the other companies that are just like wanting to implement everything new and shiny and sexy that comes onto the market, right? So it's kind of all over the map. And we've had, I think of one client, like this conversation's made me think of one client. We had multi-billion-dollar corporation that they had over 30 ERPs because of just, he called it bubble gummed and band-aided together. And it was this teetering pile of, systems and technologies and custom code and integrations and just everything you can imagine. And they had us come in to do an assessment. Just, what do you guys think? When is this going to break? How much is it going to cost? What all can we consolidate versus leaving some of these, best of breed things separate? How much of the custom code do we want to leave in-house? Some of it was on-prem, some was in the cloud. So having all of those, and the decision was, let's wait a couple of years, because there was a threshold. There was a volume and a financial threshold at which point their systems were going to break. And so they had the time to do all this foundational phase zero type of thing, but they were extremely fluent in certain parts of the organization and not so much in others. So part of our job too was to streamline that communication to where we put it in a language that each person can understand, right? Or each group of people. Does that answer your question? Okay.
If I could jump in there as well, kind of a different take to the question. I think we are seeing leaders that are more financially literate or more technology literate, but that's a double-edged sword. We've come across companies where they are way over-engineered, and we want to really have our clients focus on business outcomes that we're trying to drive towards, rather than having the latest, greatest technology. We want to be tech-enabled, but we don't want to get bogged down by technology for technology's sake. And so that's an important trend that we're starting to see. Another trend that we see is really trusting in your leadership. And so executives will just kind of punt the technology conversation down to their lower level leaders without having a strategy. And so those are two kind of opposite ends of that spectrum that we're seeing quite a bit of, that we need to make sure that we're addressing and helping people navigate. Is it's great to trust your leaders, but if they're making decisions based on their own area and not the global strategy, that's a problem. If we're having technology for technology's sake, that's a problem. So we want to navigate both of those.
Question or the comment is related to perpetual licenses and the fact that now with cloud systems, it's yeah, it's subscription. It's like leasing a car. You always have that payment. You don't own it. Someone else is managing it. Yeah, and so it's helping software vendors, and that's why there's such a big push. There's so much money to be made in the cloud. And in the question, why do we accept it? I don't know, honestly. I don't know why the industry accepts it. I don't know why the industry is so willing to go along with it. I think there will be a backlash at some point in the future. I think at some point companies are going to look up and say, I've been paying how much over the last 10 years for this software, and I'm not getting the value, or it's not fitting my business anymore. Maybe I should do something different. Maybe I want to bring some of that stuff back on-prem. I mean, God forbid, I know it's not cool to say now, but I think someday there might be a backlash to where some of that technology comes back. But I think it's a good reminder, though, of like, you have to look at economic incentives, of course. Software vendors want you in the cloud, not because it's necessarily better for you, but because they make more money and they get better multiples. Yeah, but you have to do what's right for your business. And if it is a good match, great. If it's a win-win, vendors winning, you're winning, great. But if it's not, then don't do it. Do something different, or find a way to mitigate the risk. So I guess, but it leads to one closing question. I do want to ask Scott and Mehdi this last question. If you could just pick one thing along those lines, because I think that's a great point, and we've talked a lot about emerging technologies and things that are changing and the impact of change to organizations, all this stuff. If you had to give one piece of advice to these guys out here that are thinking about their roadmap going forward and thinking about what do I need to do to make sure that I make the right decisions, to take advantage of trends where I should and do what's right for my business regardless, what one piece of advice would you give to someone getting started on their transformation journey?
Simplicity. Strive for simplicity. For outsiders, it may look very complex, but it's probably maybe less complex than they could have made it. Fewer systems, simpler backups, easier protocols, less staff to support an old system, just simplicity. Can't always get it, just strive that way.
So don't overcomplicate, keep it simple. What would you add?
Simple, and don't focus on technology at the beginning. Focus on your needs and requirements, and know exactly what you want to end up with in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the architecture, and then start negotiating with the technology and technology providers.
Yeah, view it as an enabler that comes in after you've defined what you need and want. What would you say, Mitch?
We talked about secret sauce a lot on this panel, and I think understanding and knowing who you are and sticking to your strategy.
Yeah. complete, what advice would you give?
My advice would be ownership. It's all of those are important. But I also think that it's important that you own your data in particular, so that, don't just cede it to a lot of these systems where you don't understand where it is. Understand how you control it, even if it's segmented or separated or backed up in such a way that you always have your fingers on it.
Christy?
I would say don't chase the shiny objects, because so many times that's easy to say, there's all this new technology and it looks awesome, but I don't need it today. And I think a lot of times people want that because their competitor has it, or they've talked to somebody in their networking circle and they're using this particular piece, but they're not ready for it yet. And so it's going back to what is the overall focus of the business and what do they need?
Yeah. Last but not least, what would you leave the crowd with, Amanda?
I would say take a deep breath and slow down and just get ready, settle in, and get ready for the process. Respect the process. It's hard and it's long and it's painstaking, but it's also really rewarding if it's done properly. And the pain can come early. It can be front end loaded and you can get that foundational work, or it's much more painful later. And so that's what I would say. Just kind of respect the fact that the work is the work and it takes time.
That's a great place to leave it. Thank you. Well, thank you guys for being here. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, so thank you. And thanks to the audience. And we'll